In 29 days, voters will have their say on the closest and most unpredictable election in a generation. An election where Scotland takes centre stage, where the stakes couldn't be higher. Welcome to the Leaders' Debate. Good evening from Elphinstone Hall at the University of Aberdeen. This is where nervous students trek in every year to sit their exams. Under examination tonight, we have Jim Murphy, leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Nicola Sturgeon of the Scottish National Party, Willie Rennie from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Ruth Davidson for the Scottish Conservatives, David Coburn, who's from the UK Independence Party, and Patrick Harvie, representing the Scottish Greens. And of course, please do get involved tonight. You can visit our live page on the BBC Scotland news website, or you can go on Twitter, where our hashtag is Leaders Debate. And the first question tonight comes from Gillian van Teberen. Gillian.
Evening. Is it responsible to spend our way out of debt?
Is it responsible to spend our way out of debt? Jim Murphy.
I think there's a better way of running our economy. There's a fairer way of doing it. I think we've had 5 years where the Conservative government will no doubt celebrate what it thinks is a job well done, while so many Scottish families are so much worse off. It's time to end this failed austerity experiment. And the way of doing that isn't just by talking about cuts, it's about making sure working families are better off. So we'll increase the minimum wage. We'll also abolish these exploitative 0 hours contracts, because Scotland succeeds when working families succeed. And so many working families all across Scotland are hurting so much because of what the Conservative and Liberal Democrat government have done. We'll take a different approach and we'll end that crushing Tory austerity.
Just to be clear, when you say you will end the austerity, does that mean that there will be spending rises under a Labour government? I thought you were going to bring down spending.
We're clear. There are taxes that we will increase.
No, not taxes, spending.
Well, look, we've set out our plans as to what we will save and what we would cut, but they are very targeted. What we would do, for example, is on child benefit. We would limit the increases in child benefit for 2 years in the next Parliament. But there's a different way of doing this. You don't have to just cut your way out of austerity. We can grow and invest in our people, because if people are earning more, they're working more regular hours, they can pay taxes, they don't have to rely on welfare. And that's a successful and Labour way out of austerity, and it's a world of a difference from what we've got at the moment.
Nicola Sturgeon, is it responsible to spend our way out of debt? That's what you want to do, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's responsible to carry on what has been done for the past 5 years. Cutting our way out of debt has been holding back the growth in our economy, it's been undermining our public services, and it's been driving people into poverty. The cuts that we've seen in the last 5 years have hit the 10% poorest in our community more than any other group. I don't think that's responsible. I don't think it's responsible to carry on with an austerity programme when the experts say it's going to drive an additional 1 million children into poverty by the end of this decade. Now, the Tories, Labour and the Liberals all say there should be more spending cuts in the next Parliament, and I'm glad that Jim Murphy, on the part of Labour, has finally admitted that his party is proposing spending cuts. I take a different view. I think there should be modest spending increases over the next Parliament of about 0.5% in real terms. That would allow the debt and the deficit to continue to fall. It would take slightly longer to completely eliminate the deficit, but it would allow us to spend money investing in infrastructure and innovation and the things that get our economy growing. It would allow us to invest more in vital public services like the NHS. And it would allow us to lift people out of poverty. No, the 0.5% I'm proposing is in real terms, so it's above inflation. It's a modest, responsible, fiscally responsible approach, but it means that we no longer have to watch the poorest in our society get poorer. The final point I would make about what's happened over the past 5 years is that the austerity programme hasn't worked even on its own terms. George Osborne has actually missed all of his own fiscal targets. He's missed his borrowing targets by £150 billion. So I think it's time for an alternative, and that is why the SNP is arguing that alternative in this election.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I don't think it's responsible to pass our debts on to our children. That's why we're trying to clear up the mess that we were left by the previous Labour government. But I want to pick Nicola up on one of the points that she made. She said, and I wrote it down, the austerity is holding back the growth in our economy. We are the fastest growing major economy anywhere in the world. That is an indisputable fact. We have also brought down child poverty in this country by the Scottish Government's own figures. Pensioner poverty is at its lowest level. But what I'd like to show people out there is not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. Because right now, today, we spend 3 times the amount of money on servicing our debt interest as a country than we spend on the entire health budget of Scotland every year. And if we don't bring down our debts, it's like a credit card. You know if you don't make your minimum payments, that just goes up and up and up. And it is not responsible, and it is not fair to land our children with those debts.
OK, please put your hands up if you want to contribute, and we'll come to you in a moment. But for now, Willie, Rennie.
What we've just heard is that 3 parties want to divert away from the plan that's already working. We've got the highest growth rates in the Western world. We've got unemployment way down. We've got employment way up, 174,000 extra in Scotland as a result. The economic plan is working, we should stick with it. Rather than doing what the Labour Party and the SNP want to do, which is to borrow far too much. Their answer to record levels of debt is even more debt. That's astonishing. And with the Tories, they want to balance the books on the back of the poor. I think that is unacceptable, and that's what this government has prevented. I think we should stay the course, prevent the seesaw economics of the past that has damaged this country, because I think then we can continue to get the economy on track and do it fairly.
You're in favour of continued austerity?
I'm in favour of balancing the books. I'm in favour of doing it fairly. I'm in favour of keeping the economy growing, because that has resulted in improving living standards for people in this country. That's the approach we should stick with, because that's the approach we've adopted in the last 5 years.
David Coburn.
Well, Edinburgh was known as the Athens of the North for its classical Greek architecture. Now it's known as the Athens of the North for the SNP's modern Greek economics. And quite frankly, when I hear what Ms Sturgeon has to say about this, it's terrifying, the lack of understanding of simple economics. You cannot keep on spending money you do not have, and the bigger the debt you build, you're just going to build an even bigger debt. She seems to have no simple way of paying it. The only people who can create jobs are businesses. Governments don't create jobs, businesses do. We have to get the economy going, and we have to take the poorest people in society out of taxation. So you must. UKIP wants to raise the taxation to 13,000 and take out the lowest people in society out of that, and that's the best way to get the economy moving. We also have to talk about enterprise. We talk about benefits all the time, or at least these people do, but nobody talks about enterprise. We must take the shackles off people, get ourselves out of the European Union, which has so many rules and regulations against business, and let's get the economy moving. That's the best way of getting people out of poverty.
And you want, Mr Coburn, am I right in saying, you want to save up to £8 billion a year from subsidies currently paid from Westminster to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland?
Well, what we'd like to see is we have a new system now, because now the Barnett formula is finished, according to the leader of the SNP, Mr Salmond. We have to have a new way of doing it. Well, Scotland must raise its own money through its own parliament. We have to look into this. We have to change the way it's done. But we have not said we're getting rid of the Barnett formula, but Salmond already has said it's going. So there we are.
OK, thank you.
At least we're realistic about it.
Thank you. Patrick Harvie.
Well, I think the many thousands of people who are working hard, delivering public services that we all, each and every one of us, depend on every day of our lives, will feel offended at the idea that it's only businesses that create jobs. It's a question of the quality of our spending. If we're spending money on something socially destructive, which makes the world a less safe place, such as weapons of mass destruction, we may come on to debate that later. If we're spending money on things which are keeping us dependent on an economic model which has already failed us, which drove inequality in our society and around the world, then we're spending on the wrong things. If we're creating jobs which are 0-hours contracts and low paid and leaving people vulnerable and unable to make their own way in the world because of that stressful situation that they've been left in, then we're getting it wrong. We should be investing instead in the things which build social capital, investing in the future industries which will replace the outgoing fossil fuel economy, for example, which this part of the country is so precariously dependent on still. Investing in the things which will build a stronger, better future. That's the kind of spending that we should be doing more than ever at this difficult time. The kind of spending that I'm afraid we've seen is digging us deeper into a hole and is allowing many, many people to fall through the holes of an economic system which have already failed us.
Okay.
We need a change of direction, and it's not just about obsessing over how much spending versus how much debt.
Thank you very much. Let's take some points. Yes, the man at the front.
Yeah, it's a question, Mr Coburn. He's actually very specifically said that UKIP's policy is not to get rid of the Barnett formula. Nigel Farage, at a rally that I watched on the BBC today from Grimsby, actually said it was UKIP's policy to get rid of the Barnett formula. Who's telling the truth?
Mr Coburn?
Well, as I said before, the Barnett formula is finished. We know that. What he's saying is that the long term, it's going. We don't say when. We're going to gradually wean Scotland off the Barnett formula, and let's raise our own taxation.
Yes,
He
sir.
actually said it was UKIP's policy, if they're in a position, that they will get rid of it now.
I think if
Well,
we,
we
I think
are,
if
but
we
it's
try,
not instantaneously, obviously. We've still got to win the election.
See
or
on
okay,
this.
or someone's
I think
got
if
to
we
win the
try
election.
to
On
spend
David's
too much
point.
time
Not
tonight
all at the
trying
same
to...
time. Thank you. Ms Sturgeon, first of all, then Mr Murphy. Thank you.
I think if we spend too much time tonight trying to find coherence and consistency in UKIP's arguments, we won't get anywhere at all. So, can I go back to the substance of the question, though? It's not a question of whether we need to get debt and deficit down. Of course we do. It's a question of the way in which we do that and the speed at which we do that. Ruth said earlier on that child poverty was falling. Child poverty in Scotland and across the UK is rising again. 100,000 more children are estimated to be in poverty by the end of this decade. I don't think that is fair to the next generation. Now, Ruth is standing on a platform of an additional £30 billion of cuts. £12 billion of that is to come from social security. But the Tories don't say where the axe is going to fall. We had a leaked document last week that said it might be taxing disability benefits, removing carers' allowance and taking away child benefits. So if those are not the policies, I want to ask Ruth a direct question tonight. Where is the axe falling to find that £12 billion? Because there's one thing you can know for sure, it will be on the poorest and most vulnerable in our society, and that is not acceptable.
I said I would come to Jim Murphy, but let's get a direct answer to that first of all. So £12 billion of savings from the welfare budget. Where precisely, Ms Davidson, will they come from?
Well, we've said that £12 billion are part of a further package of cuts worth £30 billion, and they're a package of cuts signed up to by the Liberal Democrats, signed up by the Labour Party as well. And we've broken those figures down. We've said £13 billion will come from departmental spending, so that's carrying on the work that we've done to cut the cost of government at Whitehall departments, etc. £5 billion will be from aggressively going after tax avoiders and tax evaders, because we've worked hard. We thought they got too much of an easy ride under Labour. We've passed 40 laws to try and crack down on companies that aren't paying their way.
Where will these cuts come from?
And on the £12 billion, what we've said is we're going to freeze benefits for 2 years. We've also said that, for example, we're going to cut the benefits cap. So instead of being £26,000, it's going to be £23,000. And we're also looking to cut the amount of out-of-work benefits that we spend, because we want to cut the number of people out of work.
And we've
had some success
how many
with that.
children will be pushed deeper into poverty because of the freeze on welfare payments? Have you even calculated that?
It's working tax credits.
What we have said is that... It's very strange, because Nicola is standing here, but your minister stood up in the Scottish Parliament and patted themselves on the back for Scottish child poverty having fallen, and it has. And we also have cut. No, you had your chance. We also have cut pensioner poverty to its lowest ever level. We had the biggest single rise in the state pension. Your party raised the state pension by 10 pence. We raised it by more than 5 pence.
We've been in fairness, thank you, First Minister. Mr. Murphy, to be fair, has been waiting a very long time to come in.
Well, first of all, it's so long ago that I wanted to come in. It was in response to something that David said. And just to say to us this evening, we've got about 40 minutes left in this programme, and it would be a waste of a debate about the future of Scotland if we allowed a conversation about UKIP to dominate the next 40 minutes, because Scotland's much more important than a conversation about UKIP. And I listen to Ruth and Nicola. Look, Ruth will give us more cuts and Nicola will give us more borrowing. I just want to be open with you, is that Labour is going to ask those people who earn the most to pay a little more. You can't have social justice on the cheap. And this isn't conventional politics, because politicians who go into elections saying we'll put some taxes up, usually lose elections. But we just want to be honest. You cannot fund the NHS and you cannot fund the education system on the current levels of taxation. So we don't want to tax working people, we don't want to tax the middle classes. But if you do earn over £150,000, congratulations, as I've said before, but we are going to put your taxes up. And I think most people in Scotland would accept that.
Thank you very much. The person who's been waiting the longest now is, thank you, Ms Davidson, Ruth, Willie Rennie. What
I find very unacceptable is that Ruth Davidson wants to cut £30 billion from public spending, but she is not proposing one new tax on wealthy people. Now, we want to increase tax, corporation tax on the banks. We want to have a mansion tax to try and deal with the deficit. She's rejected those plans. She wants to balance the books on the back of the poor, and I think that is unacceptable.
I'd like to hear from the
tax take
briefly, and then we'll go to
Can I say, the interesting thing here is about how much money is brought into the Exchequer. The richest 1% already currently pay 25%, and it's rising to 27%, which is higher than in any year under Labour. We're also taking in more money under the higher tax rate, the 45p tax rate, than in any year under Labour. And the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, has said that Jim's tax raise that he's talking about here will bring in between £0 and £2 billion. Zero.
When you cut the top rate of tax, it costs £3 billion.
It's going to cost
You've got a choice in this election.
Ed Balls says the tax increase that they brought in here.
You've got a choice.
Ruth Davidson.
You can't keep speaking to the end of the programme, Ruth.
Ruth Davidson, thank you. You can have a very brief response if you will. I really want to hear. You can, sir, in a moment. I really want to hear from the audience after Mr Murphy.
In this election, you've really got a choice. It's a Tory party that's going to defend kind of refusal to tax millionaires more, and this is a Labour Party that's going to act on zero-hours contracts.
Thank you.
And we will end those exploitative zero-hours contracts.
Thank you, Mr Murphy. Let's go up to the back, and the woman with her hand up and the scarf on at the back. Yes, madam.
At the moment, in fact, it seems that the Tories want to get into people with a knife and do the cutting with a knife, where the Labour Party seems to want to do it with a smile. I want to know what the Labour Party are going to do in terms of much cuts are going to make to the welfare budget.
OK, well, we'll take a few more points and we'll hear from the man with the glasses and the blue shirt here. Yes.
I think instead of all your bickering, you could maybe look at a history book and do a lot better to see things like the Marshall Plan and the New Deal and see the kind of spending that can create jobs and create prosperity, and the entire country could do much better. It doesn't have to be all cuts. You can spend and do far better than we're doing right now.
OK, thank you. And the woman in black on the end, yes.
I think Aberdeen's a really good example of why austerity isn't working. We boast one of the lowest unemployment rates in the UK, and yet 2 weeks ago the Instant Neighbour Food Bank had to put out a city-wide appeal for food. I'm sorry, Willie and Ruth, the plan is not working.
Thank you very much. David Coburn.
Well, all the parties here, the one thing, the difference between us and them, is that we believe in getting out of the European Union. We spend an enormous amount of money, wasting a lot of money in the European Union. If we bring that back, we could put £3 billion into the health service. We could, the £8 billion we saved, and quite frankly, that's a very good way of stopping.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
That is the thing we should do, and we should stop squandering money on foreign aid, which mostly goes to a lot of dictators. It's very important.
Patrick, I am proud that the Coalition government has met its foreign aid target.
Thank you, Patrick Harvie.
James, I think what we've all heard and what I think the audience has reacted to with some degree of revulsion is the idea that we save money by cancelling our membership of the civilised world. I think most of us would want to reject that. We would want to reject that, absolutely. But I just wanted to respond to what Jim was saying about taxation levels, because it's good to hear some people starting to talk about getting back to a more progressive taxation system. We have a very unfair tax system at the moment. But let's face it, every one of us standing here on this panel is on a very high-paid job, a very generous salary as politicians. Every one of us could afford to pay more tax, not just a tiny number who earn £150,000, but people like us on high salaries that are below that threshold. So I think everyone who cares about investment in public services needs to be willing to say, you're right, we can't have Scandinavian public services and American levels of tax. I'd like to see a Scandinavian approach to both.
And I'd like to take another question, which comes from Jeremy Fernandez.